In part 3, we see some more challenging examples. It's still to write the equation of this circle in standard form, and we'll graph as well. But check out that equation we're looking at. In part A, x squared plus y squared plus 6x plus 10y minus 2 equals 0. Somehow, we're going to work with this, and we're going to end up with that standard form, which will look like that. Okay, so we've got, it's going to take a few steps for sure. Okay, how we kind of do this, because that's a mess. So it turns out if you have the standard form, you could always multiply everything out, and you could even subtract that number back to the other side to make the right side 0. So imagine a standard form, and you were to foil here, and to put it, make it look like that, and then to subtract this number over. So if you were to simplify that standard form, you would get back to something like what we see. So now we're asked to go backwards. We're given the simplified form. We want to put it back in the standard form. How are we going to do that? Okay, it's there's this procedure we're going to work through. Turns out it's going to use something we've already talked about in the course, a method. Let's do this one step at a time. Here's what you do first. I've got these 3 points. We're going to group the x's together. So when I mean the x's, I mean x squared and 6x. We're going to put them together. We're actually going to put parentheses around the two of them. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Same thing with the y's. We're going to group y squared and 10y together in the same way. And then the constant, which I'm referring to the minus 2, we're going to put it to the other side. So we're going to add 2 to both sides. Okay, here's what it looks like when you do each of those 3 things. Group the x's, put parentheses around it. Okay, plus group the y's, parentheses there, and then add that 2 to the right side like so. Already, it's sort of starting to take shape. We got a few more steps to go, but we're kind of got the x's and the y's, and then there's a number over there that will eventually become our radius. All right, once you've done this grouping and gotten that constant to the other side, then what do? We need to turn x squared plus 6x into x minus some number quantity squared. What process will allow us to do that? We've done it earlier in the course. It probably wasn't your favorite thing to learn. Here it is again in a whole new context. We got to complete the square. And we got to do it twice. We got to complete the square on x, and we're going to complete the square on the y. Okay, so let's see what that looks like for both of these. Actually, it's on the next page for me. Let me keep this on the screen. So here's what we want to think, actually, before I show you. Completing the square, okay. How did that process work? Let's look at the x's. So you look at the number in the middle, and do you remember what to do? You take half of it, right? Half of it, not divided by 3. You take half of it, and then you square. All right, so that'd be 3 squared is 9. And then over here, same idea with the y's. Take half of that 10, and then square. That's what we add inside the parentheses. We'll put a 9 in with the x, we'll put a 25 in with the y. Okay, so we've completed the square here on the x, half of 6 squared. Completed the square here with the y's, half of 10 squared. All right? And then just like before, hey, we up and add a 9, and we up and add a 25. Then we got to balance those out on the other side. So we had a 2, but now if we add a 9 here, we need to balance that with a plus 9. And if we add 25 here, we need to balance that with a plus 25. So I've completed the squares, and then I've made sure to balance the equation by adding the same numbers onto this side. Okay, what next? Well, the next step in completing the square, we need to factor. Let's factor that, and just add these up, and we're gonna have it. What is this factored? Well, I'll just show you the whole thing. X plus 6x plus 9, if you factor, is x plus 3, quantity squared. How about the y's? Well, that's y plus 5, quantity squared. And if you add these up, well, that'd be 11 plus 25, that's 36. There it is. We've got the standard form. Pretty cool. Okay. Now, the instructions also said to graph. So let's graph. Well, in order to graph, we need to recognize the center and the radius. Let's look at the center. Remember, it's always the opposite of the number that you see. X coordinate, Y coordinate. But if that's being added, oh, it looks like I wrote the center down here. Then the X coordinate is -3, and the Y coordinate of your center is -5. The radius, if I see 36 here, that always represents r squared, so that means the radius was just 6. Okay, now you see my note to myself to use graph paper. Okay, so I'm going to just take my center, my radius, pull out another piece of graph paper. Again, you could sketch this by hand. On a test, I'll give you a nice grid. Okay, so we said the center was -3, -5. Right there. -3, -5. And the radius is 6. I hope this fits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. You know, if you Google graph paper, you can find some good stuff. I don't know if you want to necessarily print it for yourself. That's how I created this graph paper. I just Googled around. Oh, that is not the best up at the top, but okay, kind of egg-shaped there. I Googled around and found this. Of course, we have a nice copy machine at work that's free to me. You might want to just graph by hand. Freestyle. Okay, anyway, there it is. Oh no, some of my blue came through onto this page. All right, that was part A. Let's try this again. I think these problems are challenging enough. It deserves a second look. Let's check out this one. X squared plus y squared minus 8y plus 3 equals 0. So think of that like that's the simplified form. If we were to multiply all this out and subtract that number over, we want to get it back into its standard form. Okay, well, it's going to be the same steps. Begin by grouping the x's, grouping the y's, and move your constant to the other side. Now, it turns out here, there is no other x, there's just x squared. So we don't need to do anything with this. It's just going to end up as x squared in our answer. And we'll have to think through what that means for h. But the y's, we can go ahead and group them. There's really not much to it. I just throw parentheses around it. And then we subtract the 3 to the other side. Okay. Now it's time to complete the square on the y's. Well, if I see 8 there, what do I add inside those parentheses? Well, half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to add 16 inside there. Okay, so I've got x squared plus parentheses y squared minus 8y plus the 16 parentheses. And if I just up and add 16 like that, then I need to balance it out on the other side. Okay, so negative 3 plus 16. There's one more step. I need to factor here, and I need to go ahead and simplify. There's my standard form. X squared plus y minus 4, quantity squared because I had the minus, and it's equal to 13. So I have the standard form just like that. Now we're asked to graph. So let's go ahead and identify the center and the radius. I think I've got the radius written first. So the radius, we look at this number, but that's the radius squared. Well, it's not a perfect square in this case, but we still take the square root, right? Just so happens that square root 13, we can't really simplify that anymore, but that would be it. If that's r squared, then the radius had to have been simply square root 13. Okay, how about the center? So if I see only x squared, well, what would that mean for h? Wouldn't it be x minus 0 squared? Isn't that the same thing? Okay, yeah, so h is 0, and then my k is the 4. Remember, it's always the opposite. So my center is 0, 4. There it is. Now, I know the instructions said to graph. I think we get the idea with the graphs. So identify where the center is, and then count each of the 4 directions, your radius. Well, square root of 13, I'm not, just the nature of that number. It's somewhere between 3 and 4. It's like 3.5 or 3.6 or something like that. I think we get it. I think I'm going to skip the graph here, but identifying the center and the radius, we're good. And then obviously completing the square. So we're going to stop this video right here. This is the end of 11.1.